afternoon?
Afternoon.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon then. These past couple of days, where yesterday began a series of this inaugural program here with this Black History Makers program. In the racial picture, things will never be as though they once were. History has reached a turning point here and all over the world. Now today, as we continue to navigate history through the vision and legacy of so many unsung heroes and sheroes, we pause today to recognize the work and the impact of none other than Medgar Wiley Evers. This final panel for this inaugural Black History Makers program represents 3 generations of people who will reflect on the influence and impact of Medgar Evers on their lives and their respective communities. In 7 minutes or less, panel members, in 7 minutes or less, we're going to ask Ms. Colia Lafayette Clark, who was the special assistant to Medgar Evers, to speak to us on one of these 3 areas of how Medgar Evers was involved, his role as a part of the Underground Railroad movement, she's going to speak to us how Medgar Evers impacted the youth. But she's going to tie 3 areas in on the other impact that he played in the areas of the community in her generation. Then we're going to have Mr. Derek Johnson, president of the Mississippi State Conference NAACP, to speak to us about how Medgar Evers have shaped the path of the NAACP and how those influences the steps and the movements that he is currently making in his current position. And then we're also going to ask Mr. Albert Sykes, the Director of Policy and Advocacy of the Young People's Project. Mr. Sykes, we want you to speak to us on how growing up in the neighborhood of Medgar Evers impacted your thought processes on community engagement and your own individual style of leadership. So I believe that it would be in order for us to begin with Ms. Clark, and she's going to give us in 7 minutes or less the impact that Medgar Evers had on the youth movement. Now I know this is going to be hard.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you are welcome.
And I want to thank Dr. Chambers and all of those here with COFO for bringing me back. I'm one of the original people of COFO from that hot summer 1962 when we founded at Clarksdale, Mississippi. I was at that time with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, having recently left Medgar. I began my work in civil rights with Medgar Wiley Evers. So therefore I want to talk just as brief as I can, as I thank Dr. Williams for actually giving us a landmark work and a new beginning. There are always points of departure in scholarship. And I think that his is a wonderful point of departure to get us off into thinking not just about Medgar Wiley Evers, but about Hinds County and Jackson, and I've spoken with him about that, which desperately needs a history. Medgar represented a very unusual base, a base that had come out of the fall of Reconstruction in Mississippi. Mississippi having achieved what other states did not achieve, and that is 2 United States Senators, the first United States Senators, but also had a Congressman, J.R. Lynch, whose street we walk along here, and Mississippi having also had mayors. But it was here in Hinds County that little Colonel Dabney tried to return Africans, in fact, back to slavery, and did successfully run a campaign to end Reconstruction in the state of Mississippi. So Jackson needs a study, and I hope that you will turn there, because Jackson and Hinds County will produce a significant number of leaders under Medgar's direction in the second wave. But in that first wave, and I want to call it the first wave, but that's a huge wave. By 1945, we are already testifying in the Congress demanding that Bilbo, our great senator, be removed from office. the great violent racist out of Jackson. By 1950s, we had waging campaigns that were international around the life of a young man accused of rape, Willie McGee. So that's the early phase. And then Medgar will pick up on that base, and it will be that base on which he will lay his foundation. And that is what the professor has been writing about and what we've been talking about. I've come through, in a way, all of those periods, having come out of a family that was a part of the struggle against Cone Dabney, in fact, growing up at the old Cocoa Place. But also, I come out of a family that had always been, one might say, radical, in that we didn't mind shooting you if you were white, and did. But I come to Medgar out of a family that was already engaged in struggle, not newly engaged in struggle, with a background in struggle, but prepared to take it to the next level. I came early on, interested in Africa, coming from Tougaloo, and it was at Tougaloo that I want to focus for the first discussion here, because Medgar led that underground movement of all of those men and women in the state, primarily men, but there were women too. My dad used to say, "Be quiet, girl, you're standing in the company of men." I once understood that at Medgar's death, I would understand what he meant. But what I want to say is that the young people were part of that underground movement. Those of us who were willing to take it to the next level if need be. And we had no problem with doing that. Still don't. May have to. So you need to always be struggling and thinking that you never limit yourself in terms of methodology. Medgar did not limit his. So he could not talk about what was happening in the state, and I would travel with him, and he would do blinking lights, and you would thought he was Harriet Tubman, because he did not have time, nor did he choose to do what? Upstage those people who were waiting to talk with him, hold discussions about where we would be going next. And you didn't want to do that, so you made sure that nobody knew who you were dealing with. That's a whole discussion. I'll come back one of these days to Jackson and we can hold that discussion. Now the next group would be that group of young people in colleges and high schools that he worked with. My brother Louis Liddell should really be drug in here, and Hogtied and College to begin to talk about the development of the movement after I left, because they would have a two-pronged movement. I was here for the first prong, not a nonviolent movement, because NASP was not a nonviolent organization. It's a self-defense organization, so we're young people, and you can hear me talking like a self-defense. That's what we were. As opposed to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that I will go to, because I saw it as a new wave of the nonviolent organizations. But they need to begin to talk about how the second phase of the movement developed. After I developed the North Jackson Youth Council, the West Jackson Council was already here. Medgar worked with all of us, advised all of us, walked through it with all of us. So he was very careful to make sure he worked with high school and college students. And I tied the two groups together in Jackson, high school and college students, on the north side. They were already tied together in the old youth council on the west side. And during my day, Amos Brown, who now I believe is Reverend Dr. Amos Brown, was actually chairing that body. It would be followed by Willis Logan, a very young kid of about 14 years old. Now, the next group that Medgar would work with would be women, primarily young black women, but with all women. Very good with Woman Power Unlimited and other women, and making sure that he was there to provide us what we needed, but also making sure that he had an ear, kept his ear to the ground, you might say. Medgar was a listener. If you talk with him, he listened. I want to take you to my front porch. One day before the Freedom Rides are due to arrive in Jackson, Mississippi. My daddy gets me out of my room. I don't know where I was working on General Wright porch or something. And he says, "You got to come out here. There's a crying man on my porch." And my dad didn't look to us. What do you mean by crying man? I didn't think my boyfriend was stupid enough to come cry on my porch. Well, he might be, men. Right? No, you don't know men. You're too young. So I come out, and actually Medgar standing out there with tears running down. I said, "What's wrong with this man?" And he said, "I got to talk to you. You're not going to like this." I said, "Well, talk to me." Because my daddy going to be talking to me when I go back in the house, asking me what's going on out here. So he tells me that we cannot go on the Freedom Rides. And we had planned to take North Jackson youth and organize some of the West Jackson youth to participate in the Freedom Rides. And we could not because Roy Wilton, sitting in Washington, D.C., in the comfort of his plush office, was again at the business that I'd been fussing with Medgar about, making decisions for us in the state of Mississippi. So he was pleading with me not to go further with my plans. He listened, and I listened that day. I listened to a man who had to worry about his family because he was in an agency that provided all of his needs. His house, his health, I'm saying it, yeah, his health insurance, and his salary. In short, every decision he made was weighed over against the fact that he worked for an agency with a boss in Washington and a boss named Ruben Hurley over in the Southeast Regional Conference of NHP over in Atlanta, who did not give him breathing room. Now let's go back to that same girl coming home from Alabama now. I come into a press conference one Thursday evening. He stops the press conference, it's around 6 in the evening. He stops everything because he sees me, his child coming back, and he wants to talk. And I'm embarrassed because Medgar has done what? He has rebelled against Roy Wilkins and has decided to take a civil disobedience route. And it, as a result, has built a movement in Jackson. But he listened to young people. He took young people's advice. And some of us young people have a sense of guilt, and I have a sense of guilt in a sense, in having given advice to an elder brother, well, not much older, about 15 years my senior, but elder enough, because he'd been on the battlefield and I hadn't, that young people, each of you, have within you the potential to change the world. And he said that to me more often than not. You have the potential to change the world, but especially young women. All of his special assistants were women. Did y'all hear that, girls? Every special assistant that Medgar Wiley hired was a woman, a young black woman. And he carefully, very carefully, took us through each phase of development, working with his beautiful secretary, Lillian Lewis, who was his voice, his eyes, his ears, his mouth for Jackson, Mississippi. A woman who has not been celebrated and needs to be celebrated for her work here, because oftentimes when the stuff came down hard, it wasn't Medgar, it was Lillian Lewis. But she was there, and I don't want to, I'm rushing because I don't want to keep the panel captive here. But always remember that Medgar Wiley Evers was a listener. Had his ear to the ground. Listened to everybody, but especially to the young. And he respected what we had to offer. Thank you.
Now, if you can stay just for a few more moments, we really would appreciate it. I know that some of you have to go to class, but if you can stay a few moments, we're trying to get out of here as quickly as we can, but we do understand if you do have to go.
For those of you who stay, I am Derek Johnson, State President of NAACP. And I want to thank Dr. Chamberlain and for inviting me to participate in this. You know, it's interesting as I sit in this building and I recognize some less than 10 years ago this building didn't exist. It didn't exist because people didn't care about this institution, because it wasn't their institution. And it only became to fruition that this building exists is because students took to the streets. I started with NAACP because I got caught in the girls' dorm. The dorm counselor happened to be Aaron Henry's daughter, who told me that if she catch me again, she was going to kick me out and I couldn't go home. And we pleaded, well, there's nothing to do. She said, well, start at NAACP, and we did. And at that very first meeting, I was shocked, because it was a meeting of the NAACP State Conference, and people I had been reading about in a book was still alive and still doing work. So for a student in 1990 to be looking at and breathing the same air as individuals I was reading about from 1958 and 1963, I was in awe. Aaron Henry, C.C. Bryant, Winston Hudson, Gilbert Mason, they were still actively involved. They were getting older but still actively involved. So I fast forward and I began to look at what was unique about them that they continue to be around all this time. A couple things I recognized. One, they started when they were young. Many of them went away to war and came back from World War II to recognize that they had been fighting for freedoms that they could not enjoy here. And so through a network, they built a resistance movement. Many of them mentored by T.M. Howard, who was a medical doctor who had moved to Mount Bayou. But they created a movement. Then you fast forward, those gentlemen and ladies begin to get older, and there was another group of young people who were frustrated about how things were going. Trained and nurtured by a lady by the name of Ella Baker, who recognized that although she built the youth council for the NAACP, the adults were too scared to do anything, so she left. And she began to work with SCLC to build another youth movement and recognized that those preachers were not only chauvinists, but they were scared to do anything. So she left and she created something called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And as she recruited individuals to address what was taking place, you had people like Thurgood Marshall was saying, well, we don't need to get in the street. We need to deal with it in a court. They were graduates. They felt that in order for the laws to really take hold in this land, that you don't confront it, you litigate it. But it was young people. And those young people, as a result of some organization, first in Macomb, when students walked out of class because of some things that took place and established the freedom schools, and then you begin to see these young people come back home like a Mary Berry, who's from Itabena, Mississippi, who had gone away to school to come to work here, or Hollis Watkins, who was at Tougaloo, or a Bob Moses, who was 24, 25 years old. Young people. And because they were not afraid that their mortgages would get called in or get afraid that they were going to lose their house, they fought for freedoms that we take for granted now. But it was young people. People always say, well, the church led the movement. No, they didn't. Many churches and preachers were scared. And so when I slowly began to sit in one state meeting, another state meeting at NAACP, I began to read more. Now trust me, I was a 1.8 GPA high school graduate. I had a ball in high school. And guess what I was doing in college? Continuing having a ball in college. But so, I woke up one morning. I realized, life is more than this. That we have a responsibility not only to do the best we can, we have a responsibility for all of those who come from our community. Because if we don't, can you imagine what life would be like? I grew up in Detroit, in the hood. My friends and I, we talk about Detroit, our neighborhood pre-crack, post-crack. What it was like in the neighborhood before crack hit the ground and what it was like after crack hit the ground. Before crack, we do the heroin dealer, the pill dealer, the folks who sold weed, and it was organization to the criminal activity. After crack, it was chaos with the criminal activity. And when you see and you grow up in that kind of destruction, you recognize that life should offer more than what it offers. And that people should not be preyed upon because of the color of their skin or their gender or their preference. And so I began to read more and I go to the meetings and I recognize that what Medgar Evers did, what Aaron Henry and others did, they sacrificed a lot so that we all can gain much. But Medgar Evers specifically, because in any organization you have your good and bad. NAACP is not immune from that today as it wasn't then. And that people like Gloucester Curran was a tyrant when it came to true strategy of folks addressing the injustices in the street. And so he didn't want Medgar to do anything. You had branch presidents like Dart and Meridian, who's a gradualist, who didn't want anything to take place. You have folks like R.L. Bolton, who was an informant for the Sarbanes Commission, a secret spy agency, who was looking at everything that the workers were doing so they could inform the Klan or the Citizen Council to prevent and stop full integration of society. That existed within our community. But I began to read and study and recognize the movement happened because a few brave adults and a whole lot of young folk. And Medgar for Mississippi, for the Jackson movement, was the brave adult who worked with the young folks who wasn't worried about a mortgage because they didn't have one. Wasn't worried about losing a job because they didn't have one. But was willing to facilitate the energies of young people to say, this cannot be tolerated. We should not be treated this way. So as I'm sitting at Tougaloo campus and we're trying to figure out what should we be doing, we had these great debates on campus. You know, at Tougaloo at that time, we learned more out of class than we learned in the class. And we'd sit under the library. Some was drinking, some wasn't, some was smoking, some wasn't. But we were all debating what was the best course of action for revolution. Some self-proclaimed to be Pan-Africanists, some self-proclaimed to be black nationalists. And they said I was an assimilist because I began to work with NAACP, but at the end of the day, we all had some common core principles. Some of the things we would do on campus was we have Na'im Akbar week, where we bring in a guy by the name of Na'im Akbar. We talk about collective consciousness because no matter where we were politically and how we thought we could solve the problem, we all recognized that there was a problem and we were part of the solution as young people. That every year we had Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael to come in and he talked about organize, organize, organize because we recognized it didn't matter where you was organized, as long as you organize your community towards the betterment of your community, that's a part of the movement. And so we all began to talk about, so what is the big thing we could do as young people? What can we do now? We had a college president, Madeeb Shakur, who one day walked across campus and said, y'all not doing anything. We can't make money, we can't raise money at Tougaloo if y'all don't do anything. We have a history of activism. And we said, we're going to go to North Park Mall because I think we're harassing black patrons more than harassing white patrons. We go out to North Park Mall, do a survey, and realize that it was black security guards and it was white patrons being harassed. It was small. But then we began to look at a larger dynamic. Well, why is it that Ole Miss receiving more money than Jackson State? Why is it that Alcorn, which is a land-grant institution, and which was the first, for their facilities are not up to par compared to Mississippi State? And had you gone to Mississippi Valley at that time, you're like, oh, no, ain't nowhere in the world I'll go here. And then as we began to listen, and we sat in a meeting in Louisville, Mississippi, where they was having a boycott because they were not fully implementing school deseg order. There was this lawyer there by the name of Alvin Chambers. He was crazy as all outdoors. He would scream, he was loud, he was talking crazy about this case that was going to the Supreme Court. It was called the Ayers case, Fordyce versus Ayers. Jake Ayers was the father of a student who attended Jackson State, and there was a gentleman who worked for legal services by the name of Isaiah Madison who came up with a legal theory of how to address the inequitable funding of higher education in Mississippi. And that case had lasted since its filing in 1976, and at that time it was 1992. And I listened, and that summer I went and I worked in New York in the fellowship, and I went to NAACP convention in Indianapolis, and lo and behold, me and Alvin Chamberlain's roommates. And the Supreme Court had just handed this decision down that Mississippi did, in fact, discriminate against institutions of higher learning for its African American citizens. But it refused to hand down a remedy, that it sent the remedy back to the district court. And the judge who really said there was no discrimination now had to say how the remedy was going to be fixed. His name was Neil Biggers. Biggers. He was a bigot. Biggers. And I remember Alvin said, you know, I've done all I could do. I've gone to the court, we're back. And until young people take to the street, it ain't gonna make a difference. And light bulbs went off, and that was our issue. 3 of us began to meet, and that 3 of us had our first demonstration. It was at the R&D Center. 7 demonstrations later, we had over 3,500 people marching from this campus to the Capitol. A month later, because people thought it was successful, the national office, Ben Hooks was the president, he didn't think we should do it. Many of our branch presidents didn't support us. But as young people, we raised the money, we organized it, we marched. But after they seen it was a success, then everybody wanted to get in front of the line. And the next part, one paper said it was 15,000, another paper said it was 10,000. Whatever the case was, we prevented the state of Mississippi from implementing this remedy. The Commissioner of Higher Education at that time was a guy by the name of Ray Clear. And he was petitioning the court that the remedy should be that you close Valley, merge Alcorn with Mississippi State, and limit the mission of Jackson State as an urban institution, but with no additional funding. It was 5 years later that finally there was a settlement. Because of the demonstration, because of us going on Good Morning America, because we raised noise and we were not complacent. Now what's unique about this, which about you, we had fun. We hung out, the girls chased us, we chased them, people would drink. You can do both. You can do good and do well. We studied, we had a good time, we had a college life, but we were socially conscious. And now we sit in a building that's funded by the money that we was demonstrated for that Jackson State should receive. When I walk out the door, I look at the building next door, and that's another building. When I look across the street at Student Life Center, that's another building. When I go to the other side of the campus, I look at School of Engineering, that's another program and building. When I go to Alcorn, where I used to look out, stand in front of the library and see straight through the building, not through a window, but a crack on both sides of the building. When I go to Valley, and when it rained, where it used to completely flood out in that student union, and part of it was condemned because of asbestos, now it's open. That's the power of young people getting involved. That's the power of Medgar Evers and his legacy. If there were 2 major things he did, it was his ability to get out to the world what the atrocities of what happened to Emmett Till, and secondly, his ability to work with young people and organize them to take control of their destiny. If there's a reflection that you have of Medgar Evers as young people at this institution, take control of your destiny. As I stand here, as Mr. Liddell sits there, as Albert sits there, we only know as much as our experiences have taught us and our exposure has allowed us to understand. And a lot of stuff we know ain't correct. Some of the things that you know far exceed things that we will ever know. You have the answer. Now, if you think everything is fine and in society and everything is equal, then I understand why you would sit and do nothing. But if you truly believe there are opportunities to make this nation and this city and this state more just, it is your responsibility to do. A final point, you can do well and do good. Just because you are socially and politically active don't mean you are condemned to a life of poverty and you can't drive or live where you want. You can do well and do good. We have a responsibility to the communities we come from to do well and do good. Because if some of us don't step up and start doing good, none of us will be able to do well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So my name is Albert Sykes. I'm from here in Jackson, Mississippi, and I grew up in the community where Medgar Evers lived, where he raised his kids and where he ultimately died. For me, Medgar Evers was somebody who was larger than life. So he was a story that was a part of our community. I remember the first thing that I knew, and the only thing that I knew about the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King. So he was the guy that they put the posters around the school for. He was the guy that we get the day out of school for. He was, you know, the image that was projected to us more than any other person that participated in the civil rights movement. And so for me, the amazement that made Medgar Evers larger than life was that he was somebody from Mississippi who done just as much, who reached out and touched just as many people, and who had just as much influence on the trajectory, not just of this state, but of this country. And so what brought Medgar Evers real to me, what made him real to me, was meeting Bob Moses. He came to my school. I was a 6th grade student, and he was running a program called the Algebra Project. And so it was from him that I learned personal stories about how Medgar Evers moved and lived, and the things that he did in the communities in Mississippi, and the type of person that he was, the man and the father and the organizer. And so working with Bob, hearing those stories, and then looking at where I was living, and the fact that I didn't feel like it reflected nothing that said Medgar Evers lived there, and nothing that said that that community was a place where a lot of history was born. So his house means just as much to me as the Kofo building. It means just as much to me as the Smith Robinson Museum. It's another Mississippi landmark. And it's something that was a landmark for my community. And so I remember coming home from middle school one day, and Whoopi Goldberg, Alec Baldwin, and all these people in the hood shooting this movie about Medgar Evers. And I was like, man, that's Whoopi Goldberg. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it was good to see that and to understand what that meant for young people like me, to see his story get projected in a way that meant a lot to us. So we were used to getting information and being fed stuff by the TVs, and so we thought everything that was on TV was a big deal. And so to know that Medgar Evers was going to the movies, it was like, yeah. And so being able to see the importance of what he meant to this entire state. And I remember it was a moment in the movie where they portrayed his wife coming out of the courtroom after the verdict, and she stood on the steps and she said, "Yay, Medgar." And so for me, I think that my work is to continue to move us in a direction where we can one day say, "Yay, Mississippi." So we had our mega moment. We brought back with the justice, you know, much too late, but we still were able to hold him accountable for the coward that he was and for the cowardly act that he committed against Medgar Evers in his front yard. And so one of the lasting images for me is a father laying and bleeding and crawling in his driveway from the shot of a coward in his back, all because he knew the difference between right and wrong, and he decided to do something about it. And so for me, I'm in the same position now. I'm a father of 3 sons. I live in Jackson. I work with kids all across this city. And so one of the funny things is, if you ask people about our organization and what we do or what they think we are, people say, "I don't know what they is. They ain't doing nothing." And part of it is because we in Medgar Evers' neighborhood, working with the kids that nobody gonna go over there and put their hands on. We working in Medgar Evers' hood, working with kids that people written off and forgot about. And so when a lot of people say they doing change work and they jumping from school principal to school principal or organization head to organization head, and they skip over the most essential components of what it takes for us to bring change to a city and a state like this, and that's the community. And so Medgar Evers understood that. And he left something behind in the community that can never be taken, and that's a legacy of a man who knew the difference between right and wrong, and he did something about it. And so that's our call, that when we look around and we see something and we know the difference between right and wrong, and when we spot wrong, it's our innate calling to do something about it. Keith, here you go, buddy.
Well, Well, at this time, we do have time for some questions from the floor. If anybody would like to engage our panel members for something that one of these panel members may have put on your heart or put in your mind to think about engagement, to think about us as being youth and being a part of this movement that we're currently in. Anybody have any questions? Please.
Mine's for Mr. Sykes. What specifically do you do for the kids in that neighborhood? Like, is it educational base?
Yeah, so our work is what we call mathematics literacy work. And so we have college-age students who work with high school students teaching them algebra. And the high school students teach algebra to middle school and late elementary age kids. And so as a part of that, we also do policy and advocacy work with young people, teaching them about school policy, things like zero tolerance in Mississippi and effects that it has on young people. And then we walk them through advocacy trainings and get them to think about how do they take actions and how do they build different events and things that bring people out to hear young people advocate for themselves. So it's very rare that you go to something that's centered around education and young people have any significant voice in their room. And so I saw a picture last night that had the title of the article was the Champions of Education in Mississippi, and it was a panel of all white dudes from William Winter to Dick Marcus down. And so that's part of what we try to get them to look at and understand. Like, they part of the champions of change for education in Mississippi, and it's only important if young people are in front of it. So it's education and it's community organizing.
Ms. Clark, I do have a question.
Yeah, I got to talk.
As others are pondering, you mentioned that Medgar Evers, he had stages of development and leadership. And so you talked to us about how he worked with the youth and how he worked with the women and how he worked with the young people. But you particularly focused on, you mentioned a part of stages of development for women and how he hired all of his special assistants were women. What were some of the things that he did to, I guess, to cultivate the women that worked with him to be leaders in their communities?
First of all, he gave us the motivation to want to speak out. He gave us the courage to know that we could speak out. And then he gave us the courage to know that we could be the leaders. Not that many of us didn't know that we could do those things, but to give you the space, the place, and give you a little small salary so that you would be able to do those things and develop a respect for woman leadership. You know, we could be leaders, but you had one heck of a fight in the state of Mississippi when you were a woman, and in particular if you were a black woman, stepping up to the plate as the leader for anything. But Medgar was willing to not only give you that space and allow you to develop your own little projects. For me, it's the North Jackson Youth Council that would become the council that will spearhead the summer project in Mississippi, with John Salter as our advisor from Toulouse College. But, you know, then to protect us in that space so that we could be there and do it. Now, it came at a price for women. I'll tell you, young women stepping out, you get all kind of bad reputation, but that's all right. It's a part of what women get anyway if you speak out. But Medgar did that for us and stood by us. And I think that's an admirable thing for any leader to do, especially for women, and women still need it.
Mr. Johnson, you talked to us very briefly, and I appreciate you. Everything was good. I hate to, we really just need to be able to just come together and just have a forum that they can just take out the time that they need to discuss and to engage everybody, and I hate that we just have to fit everything into this time slot that we have, but unfortunately we do. But you did mention about some things in your presentation on how when you had an opportunity to sit in the room with some of these leaders, when you got a chance to see Winston Hudson and Bob Moses, and how when you were able to see some of the people that you were reading about, how that sort of made something go off, and you was like, wow, you know, this, I've been reading about you, but it didn't come real until you actually got a chance to sit in the room with them. explain how, and I'm asking this because I guess personally working with the Hamer Institute, I guess that's something that we try to do, is to bring life to the current situation by engaging these people. But for you personally, how important, just expound on it just a little bit more on how important that particular moment was for you.
But for me, it was surprising. You know, I grew up in Detroit, in the hood. I never met a black professional who wasn't a teacher. So I wasn't exposed. I happened to come to Mississippi. And so when I go into a room, and not only are people I've seen on the documentary Eyes on the Prize, but also I begin to read about, in the room, not just because they're in the room, they're still discussing strategy around a school descent court order, whether or not they should boycott. They still talking about implementation of lawsuits they have fought about. They're still talking about relevant common day issues that I thought was 41. And so for me to sit there and look and say, wait a minute, this is what I read about, and I thought this was in the black and white shorts that I've seen, but it still existed. And for someone like me who's looking for purpose, looking for a place, it was the right thing to do, to say, this is why I exist. We exist to serve others, not to serve ourselves.
You also mentioned about Alvin Chambers, and I haven't had a chance to meet him yet, but we're actually recognizing him with the Hamer Institute. We're recognizing him in April for his work. And you mentioned how he was a crazy man. And so I don't know if he still has that spark or drive, but I do want to see that craziness come out of him at some point. But and you see how to address equitable funding. So this was a meeting that you had with, well, you had a chance to sort of hear him talk about him. Talk about him a little bit. And did he play any impact on your work?
So Alvin is, and I'll say this in my office when I hire people, your uniqueness is your genius. And people who are unique and different, people try to write them off. When I find somebody who is unique and different, there's some genius there. And so Alvin has a genius, as crazy as he is. Right? So the role he played. Interesting, Alvin didn't file the Harris case lawsuit. He ended up taking it over. Ike Madison had to go, and then Lou Myers ran out of Mississippi. So Alvin took on the case. And so in that same meeting, I've seen all the other people, he was there. You fast forward, I go to the NHP National Convention, and we're roommates. And so I'm watching all of these attorneys come in and out of the room, meeting with him because he just finished arguing the Supreme Court case. Then you fast forward and we organize around the Harris case. Of course, we're communicating with him because he's the lead attorney. Then I go to law school in Houston. The very next year, he started teaching law school in Houston. So we're always, and still today, in constant communication around strategy and positioning. And the blessing of Mississippi, and I hope you all take it, we still have so many living individuals who are active, that are open to young people carrying a briefcase. Be it Congressman Thompson, or at that time Aaron Henry, or Alvin Chambliss, or Winston Hudson, they tangibly visible. Bob Moses come to town, he may call Albert and say, Albert, I need you to drive me somewhere. And for the first hour, Bob may not say a word. And Albert be just a driver like, man, this is strange. They get to a meeting, and it's a brand new person because he's having an argument with Dr. Anderson. Well, you know, whatever the case may be. History is living, it's not dead. And so we got to recognize when history is living and is breathing, and just sit there. Sometimes we don't go with the answer, we go there just to absorb the same air. And so that's what Alvin allowed me to do, and so many other people.
I have a question.
Please.
Attorney Johnson.
Derek is fine.
My question to you would be, and of course, everyone who knows me in this room, I love my Tougaloo College, so you see where we get this passion and this fire from. But my question to you is, how have you seen your life play out the same as Medgar Evers, with you serving as the state president for the Mississippi Conference of the NAACP? Or do you see any parallels between his life and yours?
You can't draw a lot of parallels because the freedoms I enjoy, he did. I mean, you know, bottom line. I draw lessons from what he did. For example, as any organization is, NAAC is a bottom-up organization. Medgar eventually understood that because National tried to send down these edicts of foolishness that don't really apply to our reality in Mississippi. And so he worked around that foolishness by encouraging and organizing other people to hit the street and demonstrate. I serve on a national board. I dare them to come to Mississippi and break some foolishness because I know their stuff don't fit our reality. Because we bottom up and our reality is different. So I draw that parallel because if Aaron Henry and Medgar Evers would have allowed Gloucester Curran and Ruby Hurley to dictate to them on how to run, we wouldn't have been a part of COFO, or COFO may not have even existed. That Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party may not have been what it was because you had folks sitting in Baltimore, at that time New York, or you had SCLC, and you had CORE and SNCC. It got to a place where the national became the consumer of the philanthropic dollars, while the local folks did the work. And COFO had to become an umbrella. Say, if you're going to put money for Mississippi, you send it to Mississippi, and this is the umbrella. That's how I still have to operate. That if money is raised around Mississippi, I'm set on top of a table. I want every dime because I want folks in the state to see the resources, see the program. And you don't use the state of Mississippi. Now, the last point, because of Medgar, Mississippi is the most fertile opportunity for African Americans in the country. Grew up in Detroit, went to law school in Houston, worked a year in D.C. on the Hill, did a fellowship in New York. I came back to Mississippi. It is the most fertile opportunity for African Americans, and for that matter, for progressive-minded people. Because what's not here is the opportunity to create it. It's the opportunity to create it. When I drive through this neighborhood, I don't see blight, I see opportunity for some development. When I see on this campus African American students and white students, I see fusion politics. That because as African Americans, we can't do it all by ourselves, but we must lead it. And for working class white, they have no friends because they've been exploited, if not more, just as much as we are. And so Mississippi is the most fertile opportunity. I'm projecting that we are much bluer than what the polls show, and it's only a matter of 4 to 5 years before we reveal itself.
Thank you. And in closing, just one more question.
Yeah, before you get to the question, I wanted to, you know, we've done a lot to talk about Medgar. And I said Medgar developed women. He also developed clarity. We sit here talking about Medgar Evers. We talk about Byron Dulles Beckwith. Not the final story. My first husband was Bernard Lafayette Jr. We were in Alabama, set up the Black Belt Alabama Project. The FBI, that's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, came to Bernard, who was also assaulted at the same time in Alabama that Medgar was assaulted in Mississippi, to inform Bernard that there was a conspiracy to kill 3 men. Medgar in Jackson, Bernard in Alabama, and another brother whose name evades me in New Orleans. We have work to do. And a part of that work we have to do, and as a woman, I mean, I'm just going to speak to it, is find the killers for Medgar. They're probably all dead now, dead old white men and some black, because there was a phone call that came to my house right after the killing to inform me, that's my house here in Jackson. I was here after being beaten pregnant in Birmingham, because Medgar's girls went off to do all this other stuff, found mothers on the move, run Haiti projects and stuff. But that phone call, that threatening phone call, was the voice of a black woman, not a white woman, but a black woman. So the Medgar case needs to be dealt with. We need to really put Medgar's case out here get it dealt with, because I think that's one thing that Mississippi has the potential for in terms of all the potentiality that's here. And that is to do justice for the first time, to really talk about the role of the FBI, Mississippi authorities, including the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission and its state senator, U.S. Senator, both of them, Stennis and Eastland, and what Jackson authorities, and what happened to Medgar Wiley and others. So we owe him that. We owe ourselves that, because there should be at some point in history where we're able to tap all of the pieces together. We should start here. I'm going to have to go. The last thing that I would like to say to young women in this room is that the world is before you, and I'd like for you to join me in Haiti on June 1. Join me in Haiti on June 1. And after that, we will take off for Mali. Medgar was a Pan-Africanist from his heart. He believed that we were uniquely tied together. You don't go off from someplace and all of a sudden become a rabbit in a new land. We were still Africans, still tied to whatever happens on the mothership, and the mothership likewise to us. Haiti is the first African independent nation in the world with a democracy. That's what it calls itself. So we owe ourselves, we owe Haiti, which started right here, by the way, Mississippi and Louisiana, on the Gulf Coast with the French. So I'd love for you to join me in Haiti. And I never extended to young women. Medgar would have liked that. And I think it's time that we begin to develop a real serious alternative to the capitalist, imperialist, racist society in which we live, and also begin to be honest about it, because that is what we live in. It governs our daily lives. Ultimately, it has nothing to do with color. It has to do with the oppression of worker populations. Medgar understood that, and I think we have to understand that. So let's get him some justice. And sisters, I'm going to leave my website, it's ColeClark.org. Drop me a note there to my email, and let's talk about building the movement that we built in Mississippi in the 1960s.
Come on, let's give this panel a hand. And this will actually conclude the first inaugural series of the Black History Makers program. And we really want to thank each of you for coming out and being a part of this. We do want to thank Dr. Michael Williams for sharing with us his works on behalf of Medgar Evers. I mean, that's a great work. I hadn't had a chance to read all the way through it yet. I haven't. But I am getting to it, so we really do appreciate you for being a part of this particular event. Dr. Chapman, thank you so much. Professor Noel, thank you. All of your students, all of the staff that's attended, thank you so much in this panel. Again, let's give them one more hand. And before we disseminate, before we leave, we would just like to get one good picture moment. So if you don't mind, we would like to get the three of the panel, Dr. Williams, Dr. Chapman.
Take my coat off.
All right.
If there's some students in the audience that want to get it.
And that's what I want to do. I really want to get the five of you guys right here, in the front right here.
Brandon and Precious.
And then I want the students to just come up and just behind them on these rows.
All right, y'all on your feet.
That's right.
That's right. Brother, stand at feet. It's nation time. It's nation time. There ain't no music up in here. Nation time.
Yeah, so we just give it right here. Let's see here. We can put her in the middle.
And here's one more announcement. If you all can join at 6:30 for an honest conversation on race. Professor Noel Didler is one of the coordinating the Jackson State Liaison. So that's this evening at 6:30 here in the Liberal Arts Auditorium. An honest conversation on race.